The king is to pause his cancer treatments during his high-profile visits to Australia this month. So his doctors and medical team have given him permission to briefly pause his weekly cycles of treatment during the visit, which is going to be lasting around 11 days, including days either side for travelling halfway across the world. Remember, the king is 75 years old, has been diagnosed with cancer, and will be travelling to Australia and Samoa in the South Pacific. The Daily Mail is reporting that the king will continue with his cancer treatment right up until he leaves London for Australia, but then will resume it as soon as he is back in the country as an outpatient. Now, the king is well used to travelling abroad for official royal duties. He's been to Australia a number of times, but this is significant because it's the first time where he is head of state of that country. But as always with a senior member of the royal family, his entourage will include a royal doctor who will be with him all the time in case he needs them. But mindful of his cancer diagnosis and of course the huge distance that he's going to have to travel and the jet lag of course associated with all the time zone changes, I understand that his program of engagements has been adapted to make sure he has enough time to rest following his very long travel and indeed during the royal tour itself. And one of those engagements does have a cancer theme. In Canberra, the king is expected to meet 2 Australians of the Year, 2 professors who have done pioneering work with melanoma, a type of skin cancer, one of Australia's most common forms of cancer. Now let's rewind. The king was diagnosed with an undisclosed form of cancer in February of this year. It was discovered after a brief hospital stay for treatment on an enlarged prostate, which was benign, but it was during that treatment that doctors discovered this separate cancerous issue. So the king had to stop a vast majority of his public-facing engagements. He continued throughout his treatment with going through his government red boxes, reading state papers or official government notes, but any public-facing engagement was off the table. The king's nephew, Peter Phillips, talked openly about how frustrated the king was with not being able to carry out his usual workload. Many have dubbed the king a workaholic. Queen Camilla also suggested during her many engagements that the king was not doing as he was told, or at least should be doing what he was told, which was resting and recovering from his treatment. But come April, the king was back out in public. He conducted a walkabout on Easter Sunday outside St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. This was the first public-facing engagement the king carried out since starting his cancer treatments. But the workload continued to ramp up as the summer months went on. His first major engagement was to a Macmillan Cancer Centre in central London alongside Queen Camilla, where he met a number of cancer patients. And fast forward to October, and doctors gave him the green light to carry out a tour to Australia and Samoa for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. So it appears the doctors are sufficiently happy with his progress, but this certainly doesn't mean he has been cured of cancer, and also doesn't mean that he has finished his cancer treatment. To repeat, he is only pausing it for the 11 days or so that he is on tour. Now, cancer isn't expected to be the only challenge King Charles is faced with during his visits to Australia. There is a Republican movement out there, and even the old friends of Republic here in the UK with those big yellow banners, those big yellow flags. The chief executive, Graham Smith, has actually travelled out to Australia to protest at King Charles's engagements. But even some Australians have publicly called for King Charles to be removed as head of state, and even those who have been invited to attend some of King Charles's engagements have publicly turned them down. For example, Craig Foster, the Australian retired football player and human rights activist, was invited to a community barbecue which King Charles and Queen Camilla were attending in Sydney. However, he turned down his official invitation from a New South Wales premier. He said on X, and I quote, "No thanks, I look forward to being in the presence of our first Aussie head of state when we put our big pants on as a country." Even Australia's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has wanted to hold a referendum on becoming a republic, but he shelved those plans back in January after his government lost, quite horrifically, in a separate referendum on whether or not to give Indigenous Australians more political rights. The Australian people overwhelmingly voted against that idea, defeating his government. As for Charles and Camilla, I suspect they will not be thinking too much about the Australian Republican movement or any protest plans. Instead, they'll be focused on causes they care about: climate change, bushfires, Australian community barbecues, and of course the all-important cancer engagement. Before the tour, King Charles is taking it easy. It's thought he is in Scotland, resting ahead of that incredibly long journey down under, as is Queen Camilla, who reportedly is embarking on a pre-tour break with friends. So it appears King Charles is resting and recuperating to recharge his batteries ahead of this hugely important and significant visit for him as Australia's head of state, the first time he has visited the country since taking on that role from his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Elizabeth II's first trip to Australia was in 1954 when she was just 27 years old. The Queen and Philip's trip was the first time a reigning British monarch had visited Australia. She visited every single state and territory except for the Northern Territory, which included all 7 capital cities and 70 towns. An estimated 75% of the population saw her in person. But by comparison, King Charles is carrying out just 5 days' worth of engagements in Australia, including the airport arrival and departure days, and only visiting New South Wales and the capital territory of Canberra. A rest day has also been additionally factored in, which is clearly in stark contrast to his mother's first trip in 1954. But Queen Elizabeth was just 27, very young. King Charles is 75 and battling cancer, so it's clear adjustments have been made given his age and his health. New Zealand, where King Charles also reigns as head of state, was originally on the itinerary but was taken off at a pretty early stage. So with such a short trip down under, Australians will be keen to make the most of their time with him. To see more content like this, search and subscribe to GBN Royal on YouTube.